Holiday Romance by Charles Dickens, Part 1. This beginning part is not made out of anybody's head, it's real. You must believe this beginning part more than what comes after, else you won't understand how what comes after comes to be written. You must believe it all, and you must believe this most, please. I'm the editor of it, Rob Redford. He's my cousin and shaking the table on purpose. Wanted to be the editor of it. But I said he shouldn't because he couldn't. He has no idea of being an editor. Nettie Ashford is a bride. We were married with the right hand closeted in the corner of the dancing school where first we met, with a ring, a green one, from Wilk to Waters Täuscher. I owed for it out of my pocket money. When the rapturous ceremony was over, we all four went up to the lane and left out a cannon, broad-loaded in Bob Redford's waistcoat pocket, to announce our tides. It flew right up, wind and went off, and turned over. The next day, Lieutenant Colonel Robin Redford was united with similar ceremonies to Alice Rainbird. This time the cannon burst with the most terrific explosion and made a puppy bark. My peerless bride was, at the period of which we now speak, in captivity at Miss Grimmer's. Roy and Grimmer, as a partnership and opinion, is divided which is the greatest best. The lovely bride of a colonel was also immured in the dungeons of the same establishment. A vow was entered into between the colonel and myself, and we would cut them out on the following Wednesday and walk two and two. Under the desperate circumstances of a case, the active brain of a colonel, combining with his lawless pursuit, he is a pirate, suggested an attack with fireworks. With, however, the motives of humanity was abandoned as too expensive. Lightly armed with a paper knife, buttoned up on his jacket, and waving the three-decked black flag at the end of the cane, the colonel took command of me at 2 p.m. on the eventful and appointed day. He had drawn out a plan of attack on a piece of paper, and was rolled up round a hoopstick. He showed it to me. My postion and my full-length portrait, where our real ears don't stick out horizontal, was behind the corner lamppost, with written orders to remain there till I should see Miss Drawey fall. The Drawey who was to fall was the one in spectacles, not the one in the large lavender bonnet. At that signal I was to rush forth, seize my bride, and fight my way to the lane, where a junction would be effected between myself and the colonel, on putting our brides behind us, between ourselves and the palings, if we were to concur or to die. The enemy approached, waving his black flag. The colonel attacked. Confusion ensued. Precisely I awaited my signal, but my signal came not. So far from falling, the hate drawn in spectacles appeared to me to have muffled the colonel's head in his outer banner, and to be pinched into him with a parasol. The one on the lavender bonnet also performed prodigies of valor with her fists on his back. Seeing that all was for the moment lost, I fought by desperate way hand to hand to the lane. Through taking the back road, I was so fortunate as to meet nobody and arrive there uninterrupted. It seemed an age ere the colonel joined me. He had been to the joint tailors to be hewn down in several places, and attributed our defeat into the refusal of the destiny drawn into fall. Finding her so obstinate, he had said to her, "Die, we surrender," but had found her no more open to reason on the point than the other. My blooming bride appeared, accompanied by the colonel's bride, at the dancing school next day. What? Was her face averted from me? Even so, with a look of scorn, she put into my hand a bit of paper and took another partner. On the paper was penciled, "Heavens, can I write a word? Is my husband a cow?" In the first bewilderment of my heated brain, I tried to think of what slender could have traced my family to the ignoble animal mentioned above. Vain were my endeavors. At the end of the dance, I whispered the colonel to come back into the cloak-room, and I showed him the note. "There's a syllable wanting," said he with a gloomy brow. "What's syllable?" was my cry. She asked, "Can she write a word?" And no, you see, she couldn't, said the colonel, pointing out the passage. "And the word was," said I. Coward," hissed the pirate colonel in my ear, and gave me back the note. Feeling that I must forever treat the earth a branded person, or that I must clear my honor, I demanded to be tried by the court material. The colonel admitted my right to be tried. Some difficulty was found in composing the court, an account of the Emperor of France, and refused to let him come out. He was to be president. Yet we had appointed a substitute. He made his escape over the black wall and stood among us, a free monarch. Our court was held on the crest of a pound. I recognized and was certain admirer among my judges, my deadliest foe. The coconut had given rise to language, and I could not brook. But confiding in my innocence and also the knowledge that the President of the United States, who sat next to him, owned me a knife, I braced myself for the order. There was a solemn spectacle at court. 2 executioners with pinafores reversed led me in, and with the shade of an umbrella I perceived my bride, supported by the bride of a pirate colonel. The President, having reproved a little female ensign for tittering on a matter of life or death, called upon me to plead. Coward or no coward, guilty or not guilty. The little female ensign being reproved by the President for misconduct, immediately left the court and threw stones. My implacable enemy, the Admiral, conducted the case against me. The colonel's bride was called to prove that I had remembered behind the colonel lamp posed during the engagement. I might have been spared the anguish of my own bride's being, also made a witness to the same point, but the Admiral knew where to wound me. Be still, my soul no matter. The colonel was then brought forward with his evidence. It was for this point that I had saved myself up as the turning point of my case, shaking myself free of my guards, who had no business to hold me, the stupids, unless I was fooled guilty. I asked the colonel what he considered the first duty of a soldier. I could reply the President of the United States rose and informed the court that my foe, the Admiral, suggested bravery and that prompting a witness wasn't fair. The President of the court immediately ordered the Admiral moved to be filled with leaves and tied up with string. I had the satisfaction of seeing the sentence carried into effect before the proceeding went further. I then took a paper from my trouser pocket and asked, "What do you consider, Colonel Bedford, the first duty of a soldier? Is it obedience?" "It is," said the colonel. "Is it paper? Please to look at it in your hand." "It is," said the colonel. "Is it a military sketch?" "It is," said the colonel. "Of an engagement?" "Quite so," said the colonel. "Of the late engagement?" "Of the late engagement." "Please to describe it," and then hand it to the President of the court. For that triumphant moment my sufferings and my danger were at end. The court rose up and jumped on discovering that I had strictly obeyed orders. My foe, the Admiral, who thought a muzzard was malignant yet, contrived to suggest that I was dishonored by having quitted the field. But the colonel himself had done as much, and gave his opinion upon this word, and honored as a pirate, but when all was lost the field might be quitted without disgrace. I was going to be found, no coward and no guilty, and my blooming right was going to be publicized, restored to my arms, and proceeding when an unlooked-for wind disturbed the general rejoicings. This was no other than the Emperor of France's aunt catching hold of his hair. The proceeding abruptly terminated, and the court tumultuously dissolved. It was in the shades of the next evening, while one were beginning to fall, where yet the silver beams of the luna touched the earth, but 4 forms might have been described slowly advancing toward a weeping willow on the borders of the pond, the now deserted scene of the day before yesterday's agoonings and trips. On a near approach, and by a practical eye, these might have been identified as the forms of a pirate colonel with his bride, and of the day before yesterday a gallant prisoner with his bride. The beauteous face of an disjection sat enthroned. All reclined and the willow for some minutes without speaking, till at length the bride of a colonel poutingly observed, "It's of no use pretending any more, and we had better give it up." "Ha!" exclaimed the pirate. "Pretending? Don't go on like that, you worry me," returned the bride. The lovely bride of tickling charged with incredible declaration. The 2 warriors exchanged stony glances. "If," said the bride of a pirate colonel, "grown-up people won't do what we ought to do, and will part us out, what comes of our pretending?" "We only get into scrapes," said the bride of tickling. "You know very well," pursued the colonel's bride, "that Miss Drovney wouldn't fall. You complained of it yourself, and you know how disgracefully the court material ended. So a marriage, would my people acknowledge it at home?" "Or would my people acknowledge ours?" said the bride of tinkling. Again the 2 warriors exchanged stony glances. "If you knocked at the door and claimed me after you were told to go away," said the colonel's bride, "you would only have your hair pulled, or your ears, or your nose." If you persist in ringing at the bell and claiming me, said the bride of tinkling to the gentleman, you would have things dropped on your head from the window over the handle, or you would be played upon by the garden engine. And at your own homes, resumed the bride of the colonel, it would be just as bad. You would be sent to bed, or something equally undignified. Again, how would you support us? The pirate colonel replied in a cautious voice, by rapine, but his bride retorted, suppose the grown-up people wouldn't be rapined. When, said the colonel, we should pay the penalty in blood. But suppose we should object, retorted his bride, and wouldn't pay the penalty in blood or anything else. A mournful silence ensued. When do you no longer love me, Alice? Asked the colonel. Redford, I am very thin, returned his bride. When do you no longer love me? Nettie asked the present writer. Tinkling, I am ever fine, returned my bride. We all four embraced. Let me not be misunderstood by the giddy. The colonel embraced his own bride, and I embrace mine. But 2 times 2 make 4. Nettie and I, said Alice mournfully, have been considering the position. The grown-up people are too strong for us. They make us ridiculous. Besides, they have changed the times. William Tinkling's baby brother was christened yesterday. What took place? Was any king present? Answer, William. I said no, unless disgusted as great Uncle Chopper. Any queen? There had been no queen when I know of it, our home. There might have been in the kitchen, but I didn't think so, nor the servant would have mentioned it. Any fairies? None that were visible. We had an idea among us, I think, said Alice with a melancholy smile. We thought that Miss Grimmer would prove to be the winking fairy, and would come in at the christening with a crutch stick and give the child a bad gift. Was there anything of that sort? Answer, William. I said that Ma but said afterward, and so she had. The great Uncle Chopper's gift was a shabby one, but she hadn't said a bad one. She'd called it shabby, electropic, second-hand, below his income. It must be the grown-up people who have changed all this, said Alice. We couldn't have changed it if we had been so inclined, and we never should have been. Or perhaps Miss Grimmer is a wicked fairy, after all, and won't act up to it because the grown-up people have persuaded her not to. Either way, it would make us ridiculous if we told them what we expected. Trance, muttered the pirate colonel. Nay, my Redford, said Alice. Say not so. Call not names, my Redford, or we will apply to Pa. Let him, said the colonel. I don't care who's he. Tinkling here undertook the perilous task of remonstrating with his lawless friend, who constant to withdraw the mouldy expressions about Crooked. What remains for us to do? Alice went on her in a mild, wise way. We must educate. We must pretend in a new manner. We must wait. The colonel clenched his teeth, thought in front and a piece of another, and he had been twice dragged to the door of a dentist despot, but had escaped from his guards. How educate? How pretend in a new manner? How wait? Educate the grown-up people, replied Alice. We part tonight. Yes, Redford. The colonel tucked up his cuffs. Part tonight? Let us in these next holidays, nor going to begin, throw our thoughts into something educational for the grown-up people, hinting to them how things ought to be. Let us veil our meaning under a mask of romance, you, I, and Nettie. Little Tinkling, being the plainest and quickest writer, shall copy out. Lizzie agreed. The colonel answered sulkily, I don't mind. He then asked, how about pretending? We will pretend, said Alice, and we are children. Not that we are those grown-up people who won't help us out as we ought and who understood us so badly. The colonel, still much dissatisfied, growled, how about a waiting eye? We will wait, answered little Alice, taking Nettie's hand in hers and looked up to the sky. We will wait, every constant and true, till the times have got so changed as that everything helps us out and nothing make us ridiculous, and the fairies have come back. We will wait, every constant and true, till we are 80, 90, or 100, and when the fairies will send us children, it will help them out, poor pretty little creatures, if we pretend ever so much. So we will, dear, said Nettie Ashford, taking her round the waist with both arms and kissed her. And now if my husband will go and buy some cherries for us, I have got some money. In the friendliest manner, I invited the colonel to go with me, but he so far forgot himself as to acknowledge the invitation by kicking out behind and then lying down on his stomach on the grass, pulling it up and chewing it. When I came back, however, Alice had nearly brought him out of his vacations and was soothing him by telling him how soon he should all be 90. When I came back, however, Alice had nearly brought him out of his vexation and was soothing him by telling him how soon we should be all 90. As we sat under a willow tree and ate the cherries, fair, for Alice shared them out, we played at being 90. Nettie complained that she had a bone in her old back, and it made her hobble. And Alice sang a song in an old woman's way, but it was very pretty, and we were all merry. At least, I don't know about merry exactly, but all comfortable. There was a most tremendous lot of cherries, and Alice always had with her some neatly bag or box or case to hold things. In it at night was a tiny wine glass. So Alice and Nettie said we would make some cherry wine to drink our laugh at party. Each of us had a glassful, and it was delicious, and each of us drank the toast, our laugh at party. The colonel drank his wine last, and it got into my head directly, but it got into his directly. Anyhow, his eyes rolled immediately after he had turned the glass upside down, and he took me on one side and proposed in a hoarse whisper that he could cut him out still. How did he mean? I asked my lawless friend. Cut our brides out, said the colonel, and then cut our way without going down a single turning bank to the Spanish Main. We might have tried it, thought I didn't think it would answer. Only we looked around and saw that there was nothing but moonlight under a willow tree, and that our pretty wives were gone. We burst out crying. The colonel gave in second and came to first, but he gave it strong. We were ashamed of our red eyes and hung about for half an hour to whiten them. Likewise, a piece of chalk around the rims I do the colonel's and he's mine, but afterwards found in the bedroom, looking glass, not natural besides information. Our conversation turned on being 90. The colonel told me he had a pair of boots that wanted soling and healing, but he thought it hardly worthwhile to mention it to his father, as he himself should so soon be 90, when he thought shoes would be more convenient. The colonel also told me, with his hand upon his hip, that he felt himself already getting on in life and turning rheumatic, and I told him the same. And when we sat at our house at supper, we always worrying about something, when I stooped, I felt so glad. This is the end of the beginning part, that you were to believe most. Part 2. There was once a king and yet a queen, and he was the main list, and she was the loveliest of hers. The king was, in his private profession, under government. The queen's father had been a medical man out of town. They had 19 children and were almost having more. 17 of his children took care of a baby, and Alice, the eldest, took care of them all. The ages varied from 7 years to 7 months. Let us now resume our story. One day the king was going to the office when he stopped at the fishing mow to buy 1.5 pounds of salmon, not too near the tail which the queen, who was a careful housekeeper, had requested him to send him. Mr. Pickles, the fishmonger, said, "Certainly, sir. Is there any other article? Good morning." The king went on toward the office in a melancholy mood, for quarter day was such a long way off, and several of the dear children were growing out of their clothes. He had not proceeded far, when Mr. Pickles' third boy came running after him and said, "Sir, you didn't notice the old lady in our shop?" "What old lady?" inquired the king. "I saw none." Now the king had not seen any old lady, because this old lady had been invisible to him, thought visible to Mr. Pickles' boy. Probably because he messed and splashed water about to a degree, and fed the pairs of soles down in that violent manner, that, if she had not been visible to him, he would have spoiled her clothes. Just when the old lady came trotting up, she was dressed in a short silk of the richest quality, smelling of dried lavender. "King Watkins the First, I believe," said the old lady. "Watkins," replied the king, "is my name." "Papa, if I am not mistaken, of a beautiful Princess Alice," said the old lady. "And of 18 of her darlings," replied the king. "Listen, you are going to the office," said the old lady. It instantly flashed upon the king that she must be a fairy, or how could she know it? "You're right," said the old lady, answering his thoughts. "I am a good fairy, Grand Marina. Attend, when you return home to dinner, politely invite the Princess Alicia to have some of the salmon you bought just now." "It may disagree with her," said the king. The old lady became so very angry at this absurd idea that the king was quite alarmed and humble, begged her pardon. "We hear a great deal too much about this thing disagreeing, and that thing disagreeing," said the old lady with the greatest contempt it was possible to express. "Don't be greedy. I think you want it all yourself." The king hung his head under his reproof and said he wouldn't talk about things disagreeing any more. "Be good when," said the fairy Grand Marina, "and don't, when the beautiful Princess Alicia consent to partake of a salmon, as I think she will, you will find she will leave a fishbone on the plate. Tell her to dry it and to rub it and to polish it till it shines like a mother of pearl, and to take care of it as a present for me." "Is that all?" asked the king. "Don't be impatient, sir," returned the fairy Grand Marina, scolding him severely. "Don't catch people short before they have done speaking just away with your grown-up persons. You're always doing it." The king again hung his head and said he wouldn't do so any more. "Be good when," said the fairy Grand Marina, "and don't tell the Princess Alicia, with my love, that a fishbone is a magic present which can only be used once, or that it will bring her at once whatever she wishes for, provided she wishes for it at the right time. That is the message. Take care of it. Might I ask a reason?" When the fairy became absolutely furious. "Will you be good, sir?" she exclaimed, stamping her foot on the ground. "A reason for this, and a reason for that indeed. You're always wanting the reason. No reason. Where, hoity-toity me. I'm sick of your grown-up reasons." The king was extremely frightened by the old lady's flying into such a passion, and said he was very sorry to have offended her, and he wouldn't ask for reason any more. "Be good, well," said the old lady, "and don't." With those words, Grand Marina vanished, and the king went on and on and on till he came to the office, where he rode and rode and rode till it was time to go home again, when he politely invited the Princess Alicia, as the fairy had directed him, to partake of a salmon. And when she had enjoyed it very much, he saw the fishbone on the plate, as the fairy had told him he would, and he delivered the fairy's message, and the Princess Alicia took care to dry the bone, and to rub it and to polish it till it shone like mother of pearl. And so, when the queen was going to get up in the morning, she said, "Oh, dear me, my head, aye," and then she fainted away. The Princess Alicia, who happened to be looking in at the chamber door, asked about breakfast, and was very much alarmed when she saw her royal mamma in her state, and she rang the bell for Patty, which was the name of a Lord Chamberlain. But remembering where the smelling bottle was, she climbed on the chair and got it, and afterwards she climbed on another chair by the bedside and had the smelling bottle to the queen's nose, and afterwards she jumped down and got some water, and afterwards she jumped up again and went to the queen's forehead, and in short, when the Lord Chamberlain came in, the dear old woman said to the little princess, "What a trot you are! I couldn't have done it better myself." But it was not the worst of the good queen's illness. Oh no, she was very ill indeed for a long time. The Princess Alicia kept the 17 young princes and princesses quiet, and dressed and undressed, and danced the baby, and made the kettle boil, and heated the soup, and swept the heart, and poured out the medicine, and nursed the queen, and did all whatever she could, and was as busy as busy could be. For there were not many servants at the place for 3 reasons: because the king was short of money, because the rise in his office never seemed to come, and because quarter day was so far off that it looked almost as far off as little as one of the stars. But on the morning the queen fainted away, there was the magic wishbone. There it was in the Princess Alicia's pocket. She had almost taken it out to bring the queen to life again, when she put it back and looked for the smelling bottle. After the queen had come out of her swoon that morning and was dozing, the Princess Alicia hurried upstairs to tell a most particular secret to a most particular and confident friend of hers, who was a duchess. People did suppose her to be a doll, but she was really a duchess, for nobody knew it except the princess. The most particular secret was the secret about the magic fishbone, the history of which was well known to the duchess, because the princess told her everything. The princess kneeled down by the bed on which the duchess was lying, full dressed and wide awake, and whispering the secret to her. The duchess smiled and nodded. People might have supposed that she never smiled or nodded, but she often did, for nobody knew it except the princess. Then the Prince Alicia hurried downstairs again to keep watch in the queen's room. So often kept watch by herself in the queen's room, but every evening, while the illness lasted, she sat there watching with the king. And every evening the king sat looking at her with a cross look, wondering why she never brought out the magic fishbowl. As often as she noticed this, she went upstairs, whispered the secret to the chess over again, and said to the chess, "We think we children never have a reason or a meaning." And the chess thought the most fashionable chess one ever was heard of winked her eye. "Alicia," said the king, one evening when she wished him good night. "Yes, papa." "What has become of the magic fishbowl?" "In my book, papa." "I thought you had lost it." "Oh no, papa, or forgotten it." "No, indeed, papa." And so another time the dreadful little snapping pug dog next door made a rush at one of the young princes as he stood on the steps coming home from school, and terrified him out of his wits. And he put his hand tough a pane of glass, and bled and bled, bled. And the 17 other young princes and princesses saw him bled, bled, bled. They were terrified out of their wits too, and screamed themselves black in their 17 faces at once. But the Princess Alicia put her hands over all their 17 mouths, one after another, and persuaded them to be quiet because of her sick queen. And when she put the wounded prince's head in a basin of fresh, cold water, while they started with her twice 17 are 34, put her 4 and carry 3 eyes, and when she looked in the hand for bits of glass, and there were fortunately no bits of glass there, and when she said to 2 chubby-legged princes, who were sternly thought small, "Bring me in the royal rag bag. I must snip and stitch and cut and contrive." So these 2 young princes tucked the royal rag bag and lodged it in. And the Princess Alicia sat down on the floor with a large pair of scissors and a needle and a thread, and snipped and stitched and cut and contrived and made a bandage and put it on, and it fitted beautifully. And so when it was all done, she saw the king, her papa, looking on by the door. "Alicia." "Yes, papa." "What have you been doing?" "Snipping, stitching, cutting, and contrive, papa." "Where's the magic fishbowl?" "In my book, papa." "I thought you had lost it." "Oh, no, papa." "Or forgotten it." "No, indeed, papa." After that she ran upstairs to the Duchess, and told her what had passed, and told her the secret over again. And the Duchess shook her flaxen curls, and laughed with her rosy lips. Well, and so another time the baby fell under a crate. The 17 young princes and princesses were used to it, for they were almost always falling out of the crate or down the stairs, but the baby was not used to it yet, and it gave him a swelling face and a black eye. The way the poor little darling came to tumble was when he was out of the Princess Alicia's lap, just as she was sitting in a great course prone that quite smoothed her in front of a kettle of fire, beginning to peel the turnips for broth for dinner, and the way she came to be doing that was that the king had run away that morning with her own true love, who was a very tall but very tipsy soldier. When the 17 young princes and princesses, who cried at everything that happened, cried and roared. But the Princess Alicia, who couldn't help crying a little herself, quickly called to them to be still, and on account of not throwing back the queen upstairs was fast getting well, and said, "Hold your tongues, you wicked little monkeys, every one of you, while I examine baby." When she examined baby, and found that he hadn't broken anything, and she held corn iron to his poor dear eye, and smoothed his poor dear face, and he presently fell asleep in her arms. When she said to the 17 princes and princesses, "I am afraid to let him down yet, lest he should wake and feel pain. Be good, and you shall all be." They jumped for joy when they heard that, and began making themselves caps out of all the newspapers. So to one she gave a salt box, and to one she gave a barley, and to one she gave her herbs, to one she gave her turnips, and to one she gave her carrots, and to one she gave her onions, and to one she gave her spicy box, till we were all running about at work. She sitting in the middle, smoothing under a great coarse apron, nursing baby. By and by the broth was done, and the baby woke up, smiling like an angel, and was trusted to be seated princess to hold, while the other princes and princesses were squeezed into a far-off corner to look at the Princess Alicia turned out with face painful of broth, for fear, as they were always getting into trouble, they should get splashed and scathed. When the broth came tumbling out, streaming beautifully and smelling like a nosegay good to eat, they clapped their hands. That made the baby clap his hands, and that, and his looking as if he had a comic tooth edge, made all the princes and princesses laugh. So the Princess Alicia said, "Laugh and be good, and after dinner we will make him a nest on the floor in a corner, and shall sit in his nest and see a dance that delighted the young princes and princesses." And they ate up all the broth, washed up all the plates and dishes, and cleared away and pushed the table into a corner. And when the Princess Alicia, in the smooth course apron, had run away with her own true love, it was the very tall but very tipsy soldier danced a dance before the angelic baby, forgot his swelling face and his black eye, and crowed with joy. And so when once more the Princess Alicia saw King Watkins the First, her father, standing in the doorway looking on, and he said, "What have you been doing, Alicia?" "Cooking and contriving, Papa." "What else have you been doing, Alicia?" "Keeping the children light-hearted, Papa." "Where's the magic fishbone, Alicia?" "In my pocket, Papa." "I thought you had lost it." "Oh, no, Papa, or forgotten it." "No, indeed, Papa." The king went slightly too heavily, and seemed too low-spirited, and sat down so miserably, leaning his head upon his hand and his elbow upon the kitchen table, pushed away in the corner. The 17 princes and princesses crept softly out of the kitchen, and left him alone with the Princess Alicia and the angelic baby. "What is the matter, Papa?" "I am dreadfully poor, my child." "Have you not money at all, Papa?" "No, my child." "Is there no way of getting any, Papa?" "No way," said the king. "I have tried very hard, and I have tried always." When she heard these last words, the Princess Alicia began to point her hand into the pocket where she kept the magic fishbone. "Papa," said she, "we have tried very hard, and tried always. We must have done our very, very best." "No doubt, Alicia. When we have done our best, very, very, very best, Papa, but it is not enough. And I think the right time must have come for asking help of others." This was a very secret connected with magic fishbone, which she had found out for herself from the good fairy Grandmarina's words, and which she had so often whispered to her beautiful and fashionable friend, Chess. So she took out of her pocket the magic fishbone, that had been ribbed and rubbed and polished till it shone like mother of pearl, and she gave it one little kiss, and wished it was quarter day. And immediately it was quarter day, and the king quarter's salary came rattling down to the chimney, and bounced into the middle of the floor. But it was not half of what happened. No, not a quarter. For immediately afterward, the good fairy Grandmarina came riding in with a carriage and 4 peacocks, with Mr. Pickle's boy up behind, dressed in silver and gold, powdered hair, pink silk stockings, a jewelry cane, and a nosegay. Down jumped Mr. Pickle's boy, and wonderfully polite, being entirely changed by enchantment, and handed Grandmarina out. And where she stood, in a rich shot silk, smelling of dried lavender, fanning herself with a sparkling fan. "Alicia, my dear," said the charming old lady, "how do you do? I hope I see you pretty well. Give me a kiss." The Princess Alicia embraced her, and then Grandmarina turned to the king and said rather sharply, "Are you good?" The king said he hoped so. "I suppose you know the reason now why my good daughter here," kissing the princess again, "did not apply to the fishbone sooner," said the fairy. The king made a shy bow. "Ah, but you didn't then," said the fairy. The king made a shyer bow. "Any more reason to ask for?" said the fairy. The king said no, and he was very sorry. "Be good, then," said the fairy, "and live happy ever afterward." Then Grandmarina waved her fan, and the queen came in most splendidly dressed, and the 17 young princes and princesses, no longer grown out of their clothes, came in, newly fitted out from top to toe, with tucks in everything to admit of its being let out. Afterward, the fairy taped the Princess Alicia with a fan, and the smooth and chorus apron flew away, and she appeared exquisitely dressed, like a little bride with a wreath of orange flowers and a silver wig. Afterward, the kitchen treasure clinked of itself into a wardrobe, made of beautiful woods and gold, and a looking-glass, which was full of dresses of a sort, all for her, and all exactly fitting her. Afterward, the angelic baby came in, running along with its face and eye not a bit the worse, but much the better. When Grandmarina begged to be introduced to the Duchess, and when the Duchess was brought down, many compliments passed between them. A little whispering took place between the fairy and the Duchess, and then the fairy said out loud, "Yes, I thought she would have told you." Grandmarina then turned to the king and queen and said, "We're going in search of Prince Certain Presume. The pleasure of your company is requested at the church in half an hour precisely." So she and the Princess Alicia got into the carriage, and Mr. Pickle's boy handed in the Duchess, who sat by herself on the opposite seat, and when Mr. Pickle's boy put up the steps and got up behind, the peacocks flew away with their tails behind. Prince Certain Personio was sitting by himself eating barley sugar and waiting to be 90. When he saw the peacocks, followed by the carriage, coming in at the window, it immediately occurred to him that something uncommon was going to happen. "Prince," said Grand Marina, "I brought you your bride." The moment the fairy said those words, Prince Personia's face left off being sticky, and his jacket and corduroys changed to peach-bloom velvet, and his hair curled, and a cap and feather flew like a bird and settled on his head. Lai got into the carriage by the fairy's invitation, and there he renewed his acquaintance with the Duchess whom he had seen before. In the church were the prince's relations and friends, and the princess Alicia's relations and friends, and the 17 princes and princesses and the baby, and a crowd of the neighbors. The marriage was beautiful beyond expression. The Duchess was bridesmaid and behaved the ceremony for the pupilate, where she was supported by the cushion of the desk. Grand Marina gave a magnificent wedding feast afterward, in which there was everything and more to eat, and everything and more to drink. The wedding cake was delicately ornamented with white satin ribbons, frosted silver, and white lilies, and was 42 yards round. When Grand Marina had drunk, laughed the young couple, and Prince Personia had made his speech, and everybody had cried, "Hip, hip, hip, hurrah!" Grand Marina announced to the king and queen that in future there would be 8 quarter days in every year, except leap year, when there would be 10. So then turned to Sir Personia and Alicia and said, "My dears, you will have 35 children, and they will be good and beautiful. 17 of your children will be boys, and 18 girls. The hair of the whole of your children will cure naturally. You will never have a measles, and will have recovered from the whooping cough before being born." On hearing such good news, everybody cried out, "Hip, hip, hip, hurrah!" again. "It only remains," said Grand Marina in conclusion, "to make an end of the fishbone." So she took it from the hand of the Princess Alicia, and it instantly flew down the throat of a dreadful little snapping poke dog next door, and choked him, and he expired in convulsions. Part 3. The subject of our present narrative would appear to have devoted himself to the pirate profession of a comparative early age. We find him in command of a splendid schooner of 100 guns loaded to the muzzle, ere yet he had had a party in honor of his 10th birthday. It seemed to our hero, considering himself spited by a Latin grammar master, demanded the satisfaction due from one man of honor to another. Not getting it, he privately withdrew his half-spirit from such low company, bought a second-hand pocket pistol, fooled up some sandwiches in a paper bag, made a bottle of Spanish liquoric water, and entered on a career of valor. It were tedious to follow Boatheart, for such was the name, through the commencing stages of his story. Sufficient would we find him bearing the rank of Captain Boatheart, reclining in full uniform on the crimson half-rock spread out upon the quarter deck of his schooner. A beauty in the shiner seas. It was a lovely evening, and as his crew lay grouped about him, he favoured them with the following melody: "Our landsmen are folly, our pirates are jolly, our diddle-dolly, de chorus." If your soothing effect of these animated sounds floating on the waters, as the common soldiers united their tough voices to take up the rich tones of Boatheart, may be more easily convinced than described. It was under these circumstances that they looked out at the masthead, gave the words, "Whales!" All was now activity. "Where away?" cried Captain Boatheart, starting up. "On the larboard bow, sir," replied the fellow as the masthead, touching his hat. For such was the height of discipline on board of a beauty, but even if that high, he was obliged to mind it, or be shot through the head. "This adventure belongs to me," said Boatheart. "Boy, my harpoon, let no man follow." And leaping alone into his boat, the captain rowed it with admirable anxiety in the direction of the monster. All now was excitement. "He nears him," said an elderly seaman, following the captain through his spyglass. "He strikes him," said another seaman, immersed dripping, but also with a spyglass. "He tows him towards us," said another seaman, a man with a wag of life, but also with a spyglass. In fact, the captain was seen approaching with a huge bulk following. We were not dread on the defiant cries of "Boatheart, Boatheart," which he was receiving when, carelessly leaping on the quarter deck, he presented his prize to his men. We afterward made 2,417 pound 10 and 6 pence by it. Ordering the sails to be braced up, the captain now stood, WNW. The Beauty flew and floated over the dark blue waters. Nothing particular occurred for a fortnight, except taking, with considerable slaughter, for Spanish gallants and a small from South America, all richly laden. And action began to tell upon the spirits of a man. Captain Bolyard called all hands aft and said, "My lads, I hear we are discontented announce among ye, and any such shall stand forth." After some murmuring, in which the expression, "Aye, aye, sir," a Union Jack, avast, starboard, port, bowsprit, and similar indications of a mutinous undercurrent, tough, subdued, were audible. Bill Boozey, captain of the foretop, came out from the rest. His form was that of a giant, but he quailed under the captain's eye. "What are your wrongs?" said the captain. "Where do you seek Captain Bolyard?" replied the Victorian mariner. "I've sailed man and boy for many a year, and never yet known the black servant out of a ship's company teased to be so sore of disapproval this craft." At this moment the thrilling cry, "Man overboard!" announced to the astonished crew that Bozney, in stepping back as the captain, in no thoughtfulness, laid his hand upon the faithful pocket pistol which he wore in his belt, had lost his balance, and was struggling with a flowing tide. All was now stupefaction, but if Captain Bold had to show off his uniform coat, regardless of the various rich honors with which it was decorated, and to plunge into the sea of the drowning giant, was the work of a moment. Maddening was the excitement when boats were lowered. Intense the joy when the captain was seen holding up the drowning man with his teeth, defying the cheering when both were destroying to the main deck of the Beauty. And from the instant of his changing his wet clothes for dry ones, Captain Boldheart had no such devoted thought, humble friend, as William Boozey. Boldheart now pointed to the horizon and called the attention of the crew to the taper spars of a ship lying snug in harbour under the guns of a fort. "She shall be ours at sunrise," said he, "so hold a double allowance of grog and prepare for action." All was now preparation. When morning dawned after a sleepless night, it was seen that the stranger was crowding on all sail to come out of the harbour and offer battle. As the two ships came near to each other, the stranger fired a gun and hoisted Roman colours. Boldheart then perceived her to be the Latin grammar master's bark. Such indeed she was, and had been taking about the world in unvain pursuit from the time of his first taking into the roving life. Boldheart now addressed his men, promising to blow him up if he should feel convenient that their reputation required it, and giving orders that the Latin grammar master should be taken alive. He even dismissed them to their quarters, and the fight began with a broadside from the Beauty. She went around and prowled in another. The Scorpion, so was the baroque of the Latin grammar master appropriately called, was not slow to return the fire, and a terrific cannoning ensued, in which the guns of the Beauty did tremendous execution. The Latin grammar master was seen in the midst of the smoke and fire, encouraging his men. To do him justice, he was not craven, for his white hat, his short grey trousers, and his long snuff-coloured surtout reaching to his heels. The self-same suit in which he had spitted Boldheart contrasted most unfortunately with the brilliant uniform of the latter. At this moment, Boldheart, seizing a pike and putting himself over the head of his men, gave the word to board. A desperate conflict ensued in the hammock nettings, or somewhere about the direction, until the Latin grammar master, having all his masts gone, his hull and rigging shot through, and seeing Boldheart slashing a path toward him, holding down his flag himself, gave up his sword to Boldheart and asked for quarter. Scare had he been put into the captain's boulder, the Scorpion went down with all on board. On Captain Boldheart's now assembling his men, a circumstance occurred. He found it necessary with one blow of his cutlass to kill, who, having lost his brother in the last action, was making at the Latin grammar master in an infuriated state, intent on his destruction with a carving knife. Captain Boldheart then turned to the Latin grammar master, severely reproaching him with his perfidy, and patted to his crew what I considered that the master who spitted the boy deserved. They answered with one voice, "Death!" "It may be so," said the captain, "but it shall never be said that Boldheart stained his hour of triumph with the blood of his enemy. Prepare the cutter." The cutter was immediately prepared. "Without taking your life," said the captain, "I must yet forever deprive you of the power of spitting our boys. I shall turn your drive in this boat. You will find in her 2 oars, a compass, a bottle of rum, a small cask of water, a piece of pork, a bag of biscuit, and my Latin grammar. Go and spy the natives, if you can find any." Deeply conscious of his bitter sarcasm, the unhappy wretch was put into the cutter and was soon left far behind. He made no effort to row, but was seen lying on his back with his legs up, when last made out by the ship's telescopes. The stiff breeze now beginning to blow, Captain Boulthard gave orders to keep her SSW, easing her a little during the night by falling off a point or two, W by W, or even by WS, if she complained much. He then retired for the night, having in truth much need of repose. In addition to the fatigues he had undergone, this brave officer had received 16 wounds in the engagement, but had not mentioned it. In the morning a white squall came on and was succeeded by other squalls of various colours. It thundered and lightened heavily for 6 weeks. Hurricanes went set in for 2 months. Waterspouts and tornadoes followed. The oldest sailor on board, and he was very old at one, had never seen such weather. The Beauty lost all idea where she was, and the carpenter reported 6 feet 2 of water in the hold. Everybody feel senseless at the pumps every day. Provisions now ran very low. Our hero put the crew on short allowance, and put himself on short allowance when any man in the ship. But his spirit kept him fed. In this extremity the gratitude of Bosey, the captain of the foreship, whom our leaders may remember, was truly affecting. The loving thought loudly William repeatedly requested to be killed and preserved from the captain's table. We now approach a change in affairs. One day, during a gleam of sunshine, and when the weather had moderated, the man at the mast had, too weak now to touch his head, besides having been blown away, called out, "Severus!" All was now expectation. Presently 1,500 canoes, each paddled by 20 savages, were seen advancing in excellent order. They were of a light green color, the savages were, and sang with great energy the following strain: "Cho achuk acho toof, munch munch neges, cho acho toof, munch munch nes." As the shades of night were by this time closing in, these expressions were supposed to embody the simple people's view of the evening hymn. But it too soon appeared that the song was the translation of "For what we are going to receive." The sheath, imposingly decorated with feathers of lively colors and having the majestic appearance of a fighting parrot, no sooner understood, he understood English perfectly, that the ship was the Beauty. Captain Boulthard, when he fell upon his face on the deck, and couldn't be pursued to rise until the captain had lifted him up and told him he wouldn't hurt him. All the rest of the soldiers also fell on their faces with marks of terror, and had also to be lifted up one by one. Thus the fame of the great Boulthard had gone before him, even among these children of nature. Turtles and oysters were now produced in astonishing numbers, and on these and James the people made a hearty meal. After dinner the chief told Captain Boulthard there was better feeding up at the village, and that he would be glad to take him and his officers with. Apprehensive of treachery, Boulthard ordered his boat's crew to attend him completely armed. And well were it for our commanders if their precautions, but it was not anticipated. When the canoes arrived at the beach, the darkness of the night was illuminated by the light of an immense fire. Ordering his boat crew, with interrupted thought illiterate William at the head, to keep close and be upon their guard, Boulthard bravely went on arm in arm with the chief. But how did it part the captain's surprise when he found a ring of savage singing and crows with the bravest translation of "For what we are going to receive," which has been given above, and dancing hand in hand roamed the Latin grammar master in a hamper with his head shaved, while 2 savages floored him before putting him to the fire to be cooked. Boulthard now took counsel with his officers on the course to be adopted. In the meantime the miserable captive never ceased begging pardon and imploring to be delivered. On the general's Boulthard's proposal, it was at length resolved that he should not be cooked, but should be allowed to remain row on 2 conditions, namely, first, that he should never, under any circumstances, presume to teach anybody anything any more. Second, that, if taken back to England, he should pass his life in travelling to find out boys who want the exercises done, and should do the exercises for those boys for nothing and never say a word about it. Drawing the sword from his shelf, Boulthard swore him to these conditions on its shining blade. The prisoner read bitterly and appeared actually to feel the errors of his past career. The captain then ordered his boat crew to make ready for a volley, and after fraying to reel out quickly, "I expect a score of 2 on you to go eat the wheels," murmured Willie Bozer, "for I'm looking at ye." With those words, the derisive Ford Daddy William took a good aim. Fire! The ringing voice of Beauchamp was lost in the report of the guns and the stretching of the savages. Volley after volley awakened the numerous echoes. Hundreds of savages were killed, hundreds wounded, and thousands went howling in the woods. The Latin Grammar Master had a spare nightcap lent him, and a long-tailed coat, which he wore high in his side before. He presented a ludicrous Ford of pitiable appearance and served him right. We now find Captain Beauchamp with this reduced range on board, standing off for other islands. And on one of these, not a cannibal island, but a pork vegetable one, he married, only in fun on his part, the king's daughter. Here he rested some time, receiving from the natives great quantities of precious stones, gold, dust, elephant teeth, and sandalwoods, and getting very rich. This, too, 40 almost every day made presents of enormous value to his men. The ship being at length as full as she could hold of all sorts of valuable things, Beauchamp gave orders to weigh the anchor and turn the Beauty's head toward England. The orders were obeyed, the freak cheers, and ere the sun went out full many a hornpipe had been danced on deck by unclothed off again William. We next find Captain Beauchamp about 3 legs of Madeira, surviving Ford, his spyglass, a stranger of suspicious appearance making sail towards him. On his firing a gun ahead of her to bring her to, she ran up a flag, which he instantly recognized as a flag from the mast of the back garden at home, and tracking from this, where his father had put to sea to seek his long-lost son, the captain sent his own boat on board the stranger to inquire if this was so, and, if so, whether his father's intentions were strictly honourable. The boat came back with a present of greens and fresh meal, and reported that the stranger was the family of 1,200 tons, and had not only the captain's father on board, but also his mother, with the majority of his aunts and uncles, and all his cousins. It was further reported that Beauchamp, that the whole of his relations had expressed themselves in a becoming manner, and were anxious for embrace him and thank him for the glorious credit he had done them. Beauchamp at once invited them to breakfast next morning on board the Beauty, and gave orders for a brilliant ball which should last all day. It was in the course of the night that the captain discovered the hopelessness of reclaiming the Latin Grammar Master. That thankless traitor was found out, as the 2 ships lay near each other, communicating with the family by signals, and offering to give up Beauchamp. He was hanging at the yard arm the first thing in the morning, after having it impressively pointed out to him that Beauchamp, with this was about spiders, came too. The meeting between the captain and his parents was attended with tears. His uncles and aunts would have attended the meeting with tears too, but he wasn't going to stand that. His cousins were very much astonished by the size of his ship and the discipline of his men, and were greatly overcome by the splendor of his uniform. He kindly conducted them round the vessel, and pointed out everything worthy of notice. He also fired his 100 guns, and found it amusing to witness their alarm. The entertainment surpassed everything ever soon on board ship, and lasted from 10 in the morning until 7 in the morning. Only one disagreeable incident occurred. Captain Beauchamp found himself obliged to put his cousin Tom in irons for being disrespectful. The boy's promising amendment, however, he was humbled release after a few hours' close confinement. Beauchamp took his mother down into her great cabin, and asked after the young lady with whom it was well known to the world he was in love. His mother replied that the object of his affections was when at school at Margaret for the benefit of sea bathing. It was the month of September, but that she feared the young lady's friends were still opposed to the union. Beauchamp at once resolved, if necessary, to bombard the town. Taking the command of the ship with this intention, putting all but fighting men on board, the family, with orders what vessel to keep in company, Beauchamp soon anchored in Margaret Roads. Here he went ashore well armed and attended by his boat's crew. At the head the faithful Ford rose William, and demanded to see the Major, who came out of his office. "Dost know the name of yon ship, Major?" asked Beauchamp fiercely. "No," said the Major, rubbing his eyes, which he could scarcely believe when he saw the goodly vessels riding at anchor. "She's named the Beauty," said the captain. "Ha!" exclaimed the Major with a start. "And you were not Captain Beauchamp?" Was they? A pause ensued. The Major trembled. "No, Major," said the captain. "Choose. Help me to my bride or be bombarded. The Major begged for 2 hours' grace and reached to make inquiries respecting the young lady. Bolted accorded him but one, and during with one placed with a boozy sentry over him with a drawn sword and instructions to accompany him wherever he went and to run him through the body if he showed a sign of playing false. At the end of the hour the Major reappeared, more dead than alive, closely waiting on the boozes, more alive than dead. "Captain," said the Major, "I have ascertained the young lady is going to Bath. Even now she waits her turn for the machine. The tide is low for rising. I, in one of our town boats, shall not be suspected. When she comes forth in a bathing dress into the shallow water from behind the hold of the machine, the boat shall intercept her and prevent her return. Do you the rest." "Major," returned Captain Boathead, "who hast sailing the town?" The captain then signalled his boat to take him off, and steering her himself, ordered crew to row toward the bathing ground, and were to rest upon their oars. All happened as had been arranged. His lovely bride came forth, the Major glided behind her. She became confused, and had floundered out of her depth, when, with one skilful touch of a rubber, and one craving stroke from the boat's crew, a drawing boat had her in the strong arms. Way's shriek and terror were changed to cries of joy. Before the Beauty could get under way, the hoisting of all the flags in the town and harbour, and ringing of all the bells, announced to the brave Boathead that he had nothing to fear. He wherefore determined to be married on the spot, and signalled for Clearman and Clark, who came off promptly in a sailing boat named the Skylark. Another great entertainment was then given on board. The Beauty, in the midst of which the Major was called out by a messenger, he returned with the news that the government had sent down to know whether Captain Boathead, in acknowledgment of the great services he had done his country by being a pirate, would consent to be made a lieutenant-colonel. For himself he would have spurned the worthless boon, but his bride wished it, and he consented. Only one thing further happened before the good ship Family was dismissed with rich presents to all on board. It is painful to record that such inhuman nature in some cousins, but Captain Boathead's unmannerly cousin Tom was actually tied up to receive 3 dozen with a rope's end, for checkiness and making game, and Captain Boathead's lady begged for him, and he was spared. The Beauty then, befrighted, and the captain and his bride departed for the Indian Ocean to enjoy themselves forevermore. Part 4. There's a country which I will show you when I get into maps, where the children have everything their own way. It is a most delightful country to live in. The grown-up people are glad to bathe the children, and all never allowed to sit up to supper except on their birthdays. The children order them to make jam and jelly and marmalade and tarts and pies and pudding and all manner of pastry. If they say they won't, they are put in the corner till they do. They are sometimes allowed to have some, but when they have some, they generally have powders given them afterwards. One of the inhabitants of this country, a truly sweet young creature of the name of Mrs. Orange, had the misfortune to be sadly plagued by a numerous family. Her parents required a great deal of looking after, and they had connections and companions who were scarcely ever out of mischief. So Mrs. Orange said to herself, "I really cannot be troubled with those torments any longer. I must put them all to school." Miss Orange took off her pinafore and dressed herself very nicely, and took up her baby, and went out to call upon another lady of the name of Mrs. Lemon, who kept a preparatory establishment. Mrs. Orange stood upon the scraper to pull at the bell, and gave a ring, ting ting. Mrs. Lemon's needy little housemaid pulled up her socks as she came along the passage, answering the ring, ting ting. "Good morning," said Mrs. Orange. "Fine day. How do you do, Mrs. Lemon at home?" "Yes, ma'am." "Where is Mrs. Orange and baby?" "Yes, ma'am, walking." Mrs. Orange's baby was a very fine one, and real wax all over. Mrs. Lemon's baby was liver and bread. However, when Mrs. Lemon came into the drawing-room with the baby in her arms, Miss Orange said politely, "Morning, fine day, how do you do, and how's little Toadman Boots?" "Well, she's put poorly, cutting her teeth, ma'am," said Mrs. Lemon. "Oh, indeed, ma'am," said Miss Orange. "No, fits a help." "No, ma'am." "How many teeth has she, ma'am?" "5, ma'am." "Emily, ma'am, has 8, said Mrs. Orange. "Shall we lay them on the mantelpiece side by side while we converse?" "By all means, ma'am," said Miss Lemon. "The first question is, ma'am," said Miss Orange, "I don't bore you." "Not in the last, ma'am," said Mrs. Lemon. "Far from it, I assure you." "Well, and pray, have you," said Miss Orange, "have you any vacancies?" "Yes, ma'am." "How many might you require?" "Well, the truth is, ma'am," said Miss Orange, "I have come to take conclusions about my children." I forgot to say what we call the grown-up people children in our country, but my children are getting positively too much for me. Let me see. 2 parents, 2 intimate friends of ours, 1 godfather, 2 godmothers, and an aunt. Have you as many as 8 vacancies? I have just 8, ma'am, said Mrs. Lemon. Most fortunate, moderate, I think. Very moderate, ma'am. Diet good, I believe. Exactly, ma'am. Unlimited? Unlimited. Most satisfactory. Corporal punishment dispensed with. Why we do occasionally shake, said Mrs. Lemon, and we have slept, but only in extreme cases. Could I, ma'am, said Mrs. Orange, could I see the establishment? With the greatest of pleasure, ma'am, said Mrs. Lemon. Mrs. Lemon took Mrs. Orange into the schoolroom, where there was a number of pupils. Stand up, children, said Mrs. Lemon, and we all stood up. Mrs. Orange whispered to Mrs. Lemon, "There's a pale, bald child with red whiskers in disgrace. Might I ask what he has done?" "Come here, White," said Mrs. Lemon, "and tell this lady what you have been doing." "Betting on horses," said Whitey, cynically. "Are you sorry for it, you naughty child?" said Mrs. Lemon. "No," said White. "So to lose, but shouldn't be sorry to win." "Where's a vicious boy for you, ma'am?" said Mrs. Lemon. "Go along with you, sir. This is Brown, Mrs. Orange. Our sad case. Browns never knows when he has had enough. Greedy. How's your goat, sir?" "Bad," said Brown. "What else can you expect?" said Mrs. Lemon. "Your stomach is the size of 2. Can't take exercise directly. Mrs. Black, come here to me. Now here's my child, Mrs. Orange, ma'am, who's always at play. She can't be kept at home a single day together, always getting about and spoiling her clothes. Play, 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 from morning to night and to morning again. How can she expect to improve?" "Don't expect to improve," skulked Mrs. Black. "Don't want to." "There's a spasm of a tramper, ma'am," said Mrs. Lemon. "To see her when she's tearing about, neglect everything else, you'd suppose her to be at least good-humoured. But bless you, ma'am, she's as peered and flounced as minx as ever you met with in all your days." "You must have a great deal of trouble with them, ma'am," said Mrs. Orange. "I have indeed, ma'am," said Mrs. Orange. "What with their tempers, what with their quarrels, what with their never knowing what's good for them, and what with their always wanting to deliver me from these unreasonable children." "Well, I wish you good morning, ma'am," said Miss Orange. "Well, I wish you good morning, ma'am," said Mrs. Lemon. So Mrs. Orange took up the baby and went home and told the family that pledged her soul that we were all going to be sent to school. They said we didn't want to go to school, but she packed up the boxes and packed them off. "Oh, dear me, dear me. Rest and be thankful," said Mrs. Orange, throwing herself back in her little armchair. "Those troublesome troubles are got rid of, please the pigs." Just when another lady named Mrs. Alcompane came calling at the street door with her ring-ting-ting. "My dear Miss Alcompane," said Mrs. Orange, "how do you do? Pray stay for dinner. We've got a simple joint of sweet stuff, followed by a plain dish of bread and treacle. But if you will take us as you find us, it will be so kind." "Don't mention it," said Mrs. Alcompane. "I shall be too glad. But what do you think I have come for, ma'am? Guess, ma'am." "I really cannot guess, ma'am," said Mrs. Orange. "Why, I'm going to have a small juvenile party tonight," said Mrs. Alcompane. "And if you and Mr. Orange, baby, would join us, we should be complete." "More than charmed, I'm sure," said Mrs. Orange. "So kind of you," said Mrs. Alcompane. "But I hope the children won't bore you." "Dear things, not at all," said Mrs. Orange. "And go to both them." Mrs. Orange here came home from the city and came to the ring-ting-ting. "James, love," said Mrs. Orange, "you look tired. What has been doing in the city today?" "Trap, bad, and ball, my dear," said Mr. Orange, "and it knocks a man up. The dreadfully anxiety city, ma'am," said Mrs. Orange to Mrs. Alcompane. "So worrying, is it not?" "Oh, so trying," said Mrs. Alcompane. "John has lately been speculating in the peg-top ring, and I often say to him at night, 'John, is the result worth the re-and-tear?' Dinner was already by this time, so we sat down to dinner, and while Mr. Orange carved the joint of sweet stuff, he said, 'It's a poor heart that never rejoices. Jane, go down to the cellar and fetch a bottle of upset ginger beer.' At tea time, Mr. and Mrs. Orange and baby and Mrs. Alcompane went off to Mrs. Alcompane's house. The children had not come yet, but the ballroom was ready for them, decorated with paper flowers. "How very sweet," said Mrs. Orange. "With your things, how plush we will be." "I don't care for the children myself," said Mr. Orange, gaping. Not for girls, said Mrs. Alpine. Come, you care for girls. Mr. Orange shook his head and gaped again. Frivolous and way, ma'am. My dear James, cried Miss Orange, who had been pepping about. Do look here. Here's your supper for the darlings, ready laid in the room behind the foot door. Yes, we are little pickled salmon, I do declare. And here's my little salad, and we little roast beef and foods, and my little pastry, and we champagne. Yes, I thought a beast, ma'am, said Mrs. Alpine. They should have their supper by themselves. Our table is in the corner here, where the gentleman can have a wine glass of Nick's and the egg sandwich, and the quiet game of beggar my neighbour and loggerman. As for us, ma'am, we shall have quite enough to do to manage the company. Oh, indeed, you may say so. Quite enough, ma'am, said Mrs. Orange. The company began to come. The first of them was a stout boy with a white top-knot and spectacles. The housemaid brought him in and said, "Compliments, and at what time was he to be fetched?" Miss Alpine said. Not a moment later went in. "How do you do, sir? Go and sit down." When a number of other children came, boys by themselves and girls by themselves, and boys and girls together, we didn't behave at all well. Some of them looked through crazy glasses at ours and said, "Who are those? Don't know them." Some of them looked through crazy glasses at ours and said, "How do?" Some of them had cups of tea or coffee handed to them by ours and said, "Thanks much." A good many boys stood about and felt their shirt collars. 4 tiresome fat boys would stand in the doorway and talk about the newspapers, till Miss Alpine went to them and said, "My dears, I really cannot allow you to prevent people from coming in. I shall be truly sorry to do it, but if you put yourselves in everybody's way, I must positively send you home." One boy with a beard and large white waistcoat, who stood straddling on the hearthrug, warming his coattails, was sent home. "Highly incorrect, my dear," said Mrs. Alpine, handing him out of the room, "and I cannot permit it." There was a children's band, harp, cornet, and piano, and Miss Alpine and Mrs. Orange bustled among the children to persuade them to take partners and dance. But we were so obstinate. For quite a long time we would not be persuaded to take partners and dance. Most of the boys said, "Thanks much, but not at present," and most of the rest of the boys said, "Thanks much, but never do." "Oh, these children are very rare," said Mr. Alpine to Mrs. Orange. "Dear things, I doubt upon them, whether they are rare," said Mrs. Orange to Mrs. Alpine. At last they did begin in a slow and melancholy way to slide about to the music. For even when they wouldn't mind what they were told, would have his partner, would have a partner, and show temper about it. And we wouldn't smile, no, not on any count we wouldn't. But when the music stopped, went round and round the room, dismal truths, as if everybody else was dead. "Oh, it's very hard indeed to get these vexing children to be entertained," said Mrs. Alpine to Mrs. Orange. "I doubt upon the darlings, but it is hard," said Mrs. Orange to Mrs. Alpine. We were trying children, that's the truth. First, we wouldn't sing when we were asked, and when everybody fully believed we wouldn't, we would. If you serve us so any more, my love, said Mrs. Alpine to a tall child, with a good deal of white back and mauve silk trimmed with lace, it would be my painful privilege to offer you bed and to send you to it immediately. The girls were so ridiculously dressed too, but we were in rags before supper. How could the boys help treating on their trains? And yet, when the trains were thrown on, they often showed temper again and looked as black we did. However, we all seemed to be pleased when Mrs. Alpine said, "Supper ready, children," and we went crowding and pushing in as if they had dry breeding for dinner. And we went crowding and pushing in as if they had dry bread for dinner. "How are the children getting on?" said Mr. Orange to Mrs. Orange, when Mrs. Orange came to look after Baby, Mrs. Orange, and had left Baby on a shelf near Mr. Orange, while he played at beggar my neighbour, and had asked him to keep his eye open now and when. "Most charmingly, my dear," said Mrs. Orange, "so droll to see where little flirters jealously. Do come and look." "Much obliged to you, my dear," said Mr. Orange, "but I don't care about children myself." So Mrs. Orange, having seen that Baby was safe, and went back without Mr. Orange to the room where the children were having supper. "What are we doing now?" said Mrs. Orange to Mrs. Alpine. "We are making speeches and playing at Parliament," said Mrs. Alpine to Mrs. Orange. On hearing this, Mrs. Orange sent off once more back again to Mr. Orange and said, "James, dear, do come. The children are playing at Parliament."